And speaking of Ottawa, looking live at Ottawa this morning, where we are learning new details about the Freedom Convoy blockade that gathered there back in February and the Trudeau government's historic decision to invoke the Emergencies Act. The documents were filed in a federal court as part of a legal challenge from civil liberties groups who say the government's action went too far. And Janice McGregor joins us in Ottawa with more. Janice, what more can you tell us about these documents? Good morning.
Yeah, good morning. I have to say, as a parliamentary reporter, it is extraordinary for me to be able to see current cabinet documents, in pale pink, secret at the top, confidential down the side. These are not the sort of things we normally see, but the redactions in them are very, very heavy. And what is left after the redactions, mostly information that's already in the public domain. In court Monday, the lawyer for one of those civil liberties groups you mentioned, he said, look, these documents are so redacted as to be unintelligible. Even the part that media reports did seize on yesterday, that sort of breakthrough headline there about how the Prime Minister's National Security Advisor said that law enforcement's gains were important and that there was the potential for a breakthrough in Ottawa. That reference surrounded by a ton of black ink, including the section right below it. So we don't know really what context might have been provided for that. We're missing that. And indeed, after the first takes emerged on this yesterday afternoon, Public Safety Minister Marco Mendicino's office put out a statement clarifying that Jody Thomas there was referencing a final push led by Ottawa Mayor Jim Watson to get a negotiation going to try to get truckers off of some downtown streets. We know, though, that ultimately that didn't work. It became clear it wasn't working very quickly, and subsequently the Emergencies Act powers were invoked. The documents show that cabinet ministers at this point were considering two tracks. They were assessing the utility of tools that didn't involve using Emergencies Act powers, but again, the details on that totally blacked out. And then there was more black ink under the track we know they ultimately did pick, consulting with the premiers and invoking the powers. Now, you might remember Conservatives at the time were telling the government they needed to sit down, listen to the protesters, negotiate with them directly. There are references in these documents to establishing a mandate and terms for a potential lead federal negotiator, but there are questions about who that could be, whether it be a politician, a police officer, some other kind of appointee. In one meeting, though, ministers were briefed about how the head of the RCMP said that in Windsor, the Ontario government went to the protesters, and remember, it was Ontario that was responsible for a lot of the pandemic restrictions that the blockade participants were objecting to. They offered to meet with those Windsor protesters directly if they ended their protest, and the protesters in Windsor had refused. So that also was part of what the cabinet was considering.
Thank you for all those details, Janice. As you mentioned, heavy redactions, lots of black ink. But other than that, any more insights from the document?
Well, there is an interesting section about a federal action plan for tow trucks, very much a preoccupation. Remember, one of the biggest problems in this was that law enforcement did not have the capacity to remove the vehicles with the resources they currently had. The document also shows the government was really focused on other critical infrastructure, that it was afraid blockades could affect those too. There are insights into the government's read on the protesters themselves. How about only 5% in its view had a strong devotion to the cause? Others' connection to it was weaker, saying that one group of protesters relatively harmless and happy, a strong relationship to faith communities, while other protesters, the second kind, more concerning, harder extremists trying to undermine government institutions and law enforcement. But, overall, opposition politicians continue to demand more transparency from the government about this decision, including this is a court case, nothing to do with Parliament. There is this parliamentary committee also pushing to see unredacted, full kind of cabinet documents to get an insight into this. But ultimately, for now, anyone who really wants to know the government's rationale for invoking these powers, the most complete documents we have on those are the ones given to Parliament, pages and pages, at the time they were invoked last February. Those have been part of the public record for months.
All right, appreciate those details. Thank you so much, Janice.
You're welcome.
Janice McGregor reporting in Ottawa.